Last year, Larceny Barrel Proof was my whiskey of the year. Can this year's first release live up to the hype? Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Bourbon Hutch, and thanks so much for joining me on this journey through the world of whiskey. So that's right, today we're diving into Larceny Barrel Proof Batch A123. Really excited, and part of the reason I'm so excited is that I just feel like Larceny Barrel Proof has been killing it lately, and if you ask me, might even be doing better than Elijah Craig Barrel Proof in recent releases. In fact, Larceny Barrel Proof C922, the last batch from last year, ended up being my whiskey of the year for all of 2022. So in terms of excitement around batch A123, it's very high for me. I've also never had an A batch, so I've never been able to get the whole collection of releases from the year and sort of track that, so excited to dive in. So the story here with Larceny Barrel Proof is that it is a product from Heaven Hill Distillery, which is one of the largest and most well-regarded distilleries in the world. Just like its brother, which many consider sort of its older brother, Elijah Craig Barrel Proof, it's released 3 times a year. This is their wheated profile. So the mash bill on this bottle and all Larceny products is 68% corn, 20% wheat, and 12% malted barley. This comes out, like I mentioned, 3 times a year. Just like Elijah Craig, there's an A batch, a B batch, and a C batch. They're supposed to be released in like January, May, and September. That's why you have the 1 and the 5 and the 9 that start off their names, but it's very wonky when you'll actually see these products in your area, and some areas you might not see them at all. So these are a little bit all over the place in terms of availability and timing. But I was lucky enough to see this on the shelves for MSRP, so picked it up. MSRP on this bottle is $60. So for a barrel proof wheated product, that's pretty limited. That's a great price. This batch in particular, the proof here is 125.8 proof, which is 62.9% alcohol. So that's, I'd say, right in the middle in terms of Larceny Barrel Proof releases, maybe a little bit closer to the higher end in terms of recent releases. Without further ado, there's not much left to do but dive into this release and see if they can keep up the train of awesome batches. All right, Larceny A123 on the nose. Interesting. So I have had 1 pour of this, but wanted to give it some time to open up, and it's still striking me very similarly, like very wheat forward. That's the first thing I noticed. Just actually a wheat grain presence, sort of like Wheaties cereal. A little bit of like the vanilla frosting or like a Frosted Flakes kind of frosting coming through. It's very sweet. Probably some fruity undertones here, like a little bit of apple, maybe a nice bright red cherry I'm getting. There's not much peanut, but there is sort of like a cinnamon nutmeg thing going on here. There's a little bit of chocolate too that I just got. And sort of like pastries or baked goods. This reminds me more of like a scone with some jam, cherry jam, vanilla, and wheaty qualities to it. This is actually reminding me a lot of the recent release from Bardstown Bourbon Company, their wheated bottled and bond. This is a little bit more punchy and jumping out of the glass a bit more, but it's got a similar kind of wheat forward and nice like pastry, bready quality to it. It's very nice, and it's actually a little bit different from what I'm used to now with Larceny, which often has a more peanutty and cinnamon spice and sort of cinnamon red hot kind of quality for me. This seems softer and more in the desserty pastry kind of realm of things. All right, let's dive in on the palate, everybody. Cheers. Nice. A lot of that carried over from the nose. It's a little bit different on the palate. There's more of like a nice warm vanilla going on, some all for that. There is kind of a wheat presence, so I still think that wheat sweetness is really coming through here. There's a little bit of that cherry jam, but there's more honey on the palate for me. More char, more barrel presence here. and then kind of like a tea, like it's almost like a black tea with honey and some cherry going on here. So kind of interesting, and the mouthfeel is really good, but it's softer. I'm not getting as much punch or effervescence, or there's no real pop rocks effect on my palate. It's much smoother than maybe normal. It's very soft, kind of what you'd expect from a wheater. So I think it's really leaning into that wheated profile here. Let's go in for a second sip and see if we can pick out some more flavors. Cheers. Okay, so that sip I did get a little bit darker, more base tones. There's more of like a dark chocolate note coming through now for me, which I really like. Almost like dark chocolate covered cherries, because there is a fruitiness there. I got more of that like nutmeg and cinnamon spice kicking up. The back end and the finish are where I get more of that spice. The front end is much sweeter and sort of inviting and soft. Okay, speaking of that, let's go back in for that third sip and we'll give a full recap of the experience. Just before we do that, I do want to say if you're enjoying all the content coming from the channel, there's more to come. Got some great bottles lined up to review for you guys and some fun videos. So if you haven't already, please consider hitting that subscribe button. While you're at it, hit that like button, and also comment down below if you've tasted Larceny Barrel Proof A123. What did you think? All right, let's go into the palate for the third sip. Cheers. Okay, so finish-wise, I want to talk about some of the sensations I'm getting. Getting sort of a big burst of heat, so could be some proofiness. It's some cinnamon spice in there too. It's a little bit more oak than I was expecting now. Some oak building up on the palate, so that's a nice presence. It is a little drying actually on the finish. I do think the finish, I wish it had a little bit more of those like sweet flavors that stick around. I'm feeling like it lacks in that a little bit. But again, to walk you through the whole progression of this sip, sort of like starts off with that nice like warm honey and vanilla, really nice kind of soft sweet flavors. In the middle, I get more of that like dark chocolate and some of that like pastry and cherry, almost like a dark chocolate covered cherry or a pastry with chocolate drizzle and cherry drizzle, something like that. So sort of bready. There is a wheat presence throughout the whole thing though, sort of like from the beginning to the end. Kind of the wheat grain and the wheat profile are prominent here. And then the finish for me goes a little bit more heat forward with some cinnamon spice, and then has a little bit of a drying oak characteristic. So what do I think overall? I think that this is a really nice batch. I think it's different than a couple of the previous batches. I think B522 was very like caramel and candy forward. C922 was nice and complex and rich with some nice cinnamon punch. This one is more of that soft wheated profile and some pastry notes coming through, so it's different. I think if I had to critique it a little bit, I think that finish isn't as strong as I'd like. I'd like to see more flavor stick around longer, but it's still pretty solid of a finish. So overall, a really nice batch, a good batch, one that's well worth the $60. I think in terms of price that I'd end up paying for this, I'd probably go as high as like 80 bucks. That probably makes a lot of sense. C922 in my head, that's like I'd spend 100 bucks on that because it's just a phenomenal batch. This one, more in that 80 bucks kind of range. We'll have to do comparisons though and really figure out where this all sits. First impressions, it's a really solid batch, and I hope they continue this trend. I hope that the rest of the year continues to step it up, because I've never had the A batch before, but the B batch and the C batch last year both impressed me a lot. So looking forward to the rest of Larceny Barrel Proof for 2023. Again, let me know in the comments below if you've been able to try this whiskey and what you thought. Do you think it's better than C922? Do you think it's the best A batch they've ever done? Are you excited for the rest of the year? Just want to hear what you guys are all experiencing. Until I see you guys again for another video, all I can say is keep drinking good whiskey and cheers.